They said he came out his front door, walked into the yard, and pointed a gun at them. But if that's true, then why is this officer walking away less than 60 seconds later with his back turned to the alleged danger? Later that night, they find him on his front porch, sitting Indian style and talking on the phone. They said he put the phone down, lifted a gun, and aimed it at them. And that's when they shot him. But that can't be true because the snipers were invisible to Stoneman. It was the middle of the night. They were 70 yards away, hidden under a truck and behind a concealment cloth while wearing camouflage. There were no radio transmissions from these snipers indicating he was armed. Instead, they said Stoneman was on his phone.
Apparently the subject is sitting on the front porch at this time on the telephone.
12 days later, a grand jury clears the snipers of any wrongdoing. But I bet they never saw this note from the lead investigator that strongly suggests the shooting was accidental at best. Two years ago, I found out a friend of mine from high school, a guy named Stoneman, had just been sentenced to 10 years in prison for threatening 4 police officers with a gun. The incident occurred in Odessa, Texas, on June 6, 2012. Police snipers shot Stoneman, but he survived. His family told me his case was a sham, so I decided to investigate it myself.
One of the nicest human beings you'll ever meet in your life. And would do anything for you. Even if he didn't know you, you just ask him.
Using open records requests, I obtained all of the police reports, official statements, logs, and in-dash video, as well as crime scene photographs. 2 stories emerged. First, there was the police narrative, and then second, there was the truth. And the truth turned out to be that the police botched the shooting, and rather than own up to it, they blamed my friend and then tried to cover it up.
Kind of timid, very sweet, very polite.
I think anybody would say, that had any interaction with him at all, would say that he seemed to be a very peaceful, happy guy, very, very concerned about other people, not himself. Just selfless, volunteering for just about anything.
The story begins one night when Stoneman's ex-wife receives text messages from him. He sounds suicidal, so she reports it to the police. Officers Steve Fuentes and William Upchurch are the first to respond. They knock on Stoneman's front door. He answers, but abruptly shuts it and sets the top lock. They retreat back into the neighborhood while the other officers and supervisors begin arriving. Sergeant Morrell tries to get Stoneman on the phone, but the conversations are brief because Stoneman doesn't believe the police can help him.
What's his attitude? He'll be over soon, unless I can make you a millionaire.
Then officers hear 2 gunshots coming from the backyard. Suddenly, Stoneman appears in his front yard and he's holding a gun. They say he lifts it and then points it at them, which can be considered an aggravated assault. Stoneman then supposedly turns and walks back inside his house. The first problem with this claim is if Stoneman is surrounded by multiple officers and supervisors, most with guns drawn, why didn't they shoot him? Second, here's an officer less than a minute later walking away from the scene with his back turned to where Stoneman was last seen. If someone's threatening officers with a gun, would you be so relaxed? Of the 50-plus written reports filed by officers, exactly 0 of them record Stoneman saying anything threatening either over the phone or in person. If he came out and threatened officers, why did the supervisor at the scene come over the radio and simply say, "Wouldn't it be safer to let everyone know their life was in danger if Stoneman was actually threatening everyone with a gun?" At some point, these inconsistencies cross a threshold, and it becomes difficult to believe the event happened as the police describe. When your mind is finally free from giving the cops the benefit of the doubt, the truth of what actually occurred that night starts to emerge, and the omissions become the proof. For example, it's not just that the incident commander gave such an understated description of the alleged assault. The other officers on the scene also failed to call out over the radio that they had just been threatened. Think about that. If someone threatens you with a gun, wouldn't you start letting everyone else know over the radio what happened? Immediately? The police radio should have lit up like a Christmas tree with warnings, cautions, and alerts. But even more than words, look at the police actions after this point. First, no one made any attempt to detain or arrest Stoneman. They had his cell phone number, so they could have called him again. They had a bullhorn, but no one told Stoneman he was under arrest. In fact, they didn't even give him any lawful orders all the way up until they shot him 90 minutes after the incident began. One thing they did, which does seem consistent with Stoneman being a genuine threat, is they started evacuating the neighborhood. They saw him with a gun, so it makes some sense. But did they do this because Stoneman was actually dangerous? Or was it because they were about to bring in the SWAT team, which would itself cause danger?
The resident went around the corner of here, exactly what this time. 10 more. CP to Sierra. The location you're at, can you give me a better where you're at on Revere?
The headlights you just saw came from the house on the left. That's the neighbor that's being evacuated. If the police had actually witnessed a felony committed by somebody armed with a gun, would they really evacuate the next door neighbor out their front door? Pay close attention to this next issue. Instead of attempting to take Stoneman into custody, the Odessa police force prepared paperwork for a search warrant. Now that may not sound odd, but consider that when a police officer witnesses a crime in plain view, they are required by law to arrest the person, especially if it was a felony. To be clear, the search warrant makes perfect sense for the actual situation. They heard gunshots, and they saw Stoneman with a gun, but they didn't see him fire the weapon. To determine if he should be charged with a disorderly conduct or noise violation, which are both misdemeanors, they needed to examine where the gunshot occurred and see if it could be tied to Stoneman's weapon. These were dots the search warrant was supposed to connect. And keep in mind, they were acting on this search warrant idea all the way up until they shot Stoneman at 1:11 a.m. If the evidence doesn't support the narrative, we have to find out why. The events earlier in the evening appear contrived by the Odessa Police Department, but why? Isn't it because they had something to hide, and isn't that something the shooting of Heath Stoneman? The police snipers that shot Stoneman said he was sitting on his front porch using his cell phone. According to them, he laid the phone on the ground in front of him and picked up a gun and aimed it at them. They shot him at exactly 31 seconds after 1:11 a.m. But his phone records show that he received an inbound call at exactly 24 seconds after 1:09 a.m. In other words, 2 minutes before they shot him. The neighbor who called Stoneman was questioned by authorities about the events of the evening, but was never asked about this all-important phone call. Do you remember how long you were on the phone with him?
I was on the phone, about a good 3 minutes, 2-3 minutes.
If investigators had simply asked about the phone call, they would have recognized that the time frame overlapped with the shooting. Knowing this, investigators should have looked more closely at the wounds on Stoneman's body, which aren't consistent with someone holding a shotgun. Instead, they appear to be of someone talking on the phone. With the phone records and the wounds, the next logical issue to confront would have been the location of the gun Stoneman was alleged to possess. But when they came upon his wounded body, no one documented or marked where the gun was, which is a direct violation of fundamental crime scene procedure. To make matters worse, when you examine the record on how the gun was moved from where Stoneman was on the porch to its documented location in the front yard, two distinct and incompatible stories emerge, which should tell us that one or both are false. The likeliest story is that the gun ended up in the front yard because Stoneman took it there during the incident earlier in the evening. To understand how badly OPD botched the shooting, you have to look at both the legal standard of legitimate deadly force along with examples which illustrate the key elements of the standard. In Tennessee v. Garner, the Supreme Court said that deadly force can be used to prevent escape if the suspect poses an immediate threat to officers or others, but only if warned when feasible. In Graham v. Connor, we find that deadly force during an arrest or seizure is allowed if the totality of circumstances warrant it. Again, the suspect must be attempting to resist or to evade arrest. They must pose an immediate threat, and the crime in question must be of a serious nature. Police officers who use deadly force to prevent an escape, to make an arrest, or to perform a seizure must issue orders or warnings prior to using deadly force. In all cases, the suspect must be actively disobeying orders to stop fleeing or resisting arrest. Before I tell you how these standards apply to the Stoneman case, let me show you some examples where officers followed these rules.
Stay down! Stay down! Stay down! Stop! Hands up!
He got his gun out. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. Oh shit. They got their guns out. Oh, he just killed this man.
Now let's listen to the Stoneman shooting.
Jesus Christ.
See the difference? In the Stoneman case, there's no warning and there are no lawful orders. He isn't resisting arrest or fleeing the scene. Why would he? He hasn't committed any crimes, much less felonies. But more importantly, to effect an arrest, you have to actually say something to the suspect. If he doesn't comply, then resisting or fleeing becomes possible. Now, OPD wants you to believe there wasn't enough time to warn or arrest Stoneman because he was whipping out his gun in the heat of the moment. But that's false because they knew he was there for 10 minutes. They said so on the radio. To make matters more ridiculous, their armored personnel carrier had moved into position between Stoneman and the snipers, and the snipers asked it to move back, placing themselves in the line of fire. What they should have done was effect the arrest from the APC by using their spotlight and their bullhorn. This begins with an order to Stoneman to do something, anything, like put up his hands or lay down on the ground. And if he doesn't comply, then you escalate the situation, but not until then. It should now be clearer why they took Stoneman's actions from earlier in the evening, which were a misdemeanor at best, and turned them into a felony. They needed that felony to add legitimacy to a botched shooting. You can't shoot someone who's only committed a misdemeanor. especially if they aren't resisting or fleeing. Not only does this violate legal use of force standards, it also violates basic incident response protocols, which make very clear that maintaining constant communication with a barricaded subject is critical throughout an incident. That's why they have throw phones, for God's sake.
Why would you have a sniper? How in the hell could you justify that? In the Odessa PD, what are the criteria for deploying snipers? What are your departmental regulations on that? Do you have regulations on that? They simply ought to outlaw the police use of snipers, period.
Now that we're crystal clear on what didn't happen that night, we can use what scant evidence there is to describe what actually happened. To do this, we have to go outside the boundaries of the official reports and sworn statements to a notebook kept by the lead investigator, Don Williams. In it, we find one statement attributed to each sniper. Think of this as the unofficial preliminary questioning before the official mandatory interview. Next to John Sykes' name, Williams writes, quote, "He's raising up, and I thought he meant he was raising up at us," end quote. Next to Kevin Chance's name, William writes, quote, "It's possible he saw us," end quote. What do these statements mean? And why were they excluded from Williams' final report? Let's try to put them back into the context of the shooting. Chance and Sykes are under the truck. Sykes hears Chance say, "He's raising up," and Sykes thought he meant raising up at us. Or in other words, they were possibly under attack. Sykes isn't at the ready, but pulls the trigger anyway, and unsurprisingly, he misses the target, which is Stoneman. 2 seconds later, Chance apparently also pulls the trigger and this time drops Stoneman to the ground. So maybe Ranger Don Williams asks Chance if the lighting was bad, "And are you sure this guy Stoneman could see you?" To which Chance replies, "It's possible he saw us." Maybe Williams pressed him because of the distance, lighting, concealment cloth, and camouflage. That's a pretty weak 50-50 statement. Chance couldn't even say for certain that Stoneman could see him and Sykes. Shockingly, Ranger Williams doesn't revisit either of these issues in his official interview with the snipers a couple days later. What kind of investigation leaves these two essential and critical issues out of the official interview? Is there any further reason to believe the shooting was accidental? Yes, because immediately after the shooting, Chance comes over the radio to announce "Tango down," meaning target down, i.e. Stoneman. But that's all he says. And everyone on scene was under the mistaken impression that Stoneman had shot himself. Remember, this was originally a suicide call. The radio is what responders use to communicate important details about the incident as it happens. The radio silence from Chance and Sykes after the shooting is almost unthinkable. It prevented their team members from having adequate situational awareness. Think about it. Approaching a suicide victim is very different from approaching a guy threatening police with a gun. None of them actually thought that because the earlier incident hadn't been fully fabricated. The Odessa Police Department knew all of this when they started rewriting what happened in the earlier incident that night. But then a major obstacle presented itself. They had to make sure that no evidence contradicted their story. You see, when the supervisors arrived that night, their vehicle is the only one pointed in the direction of Stoneman's house with any chance of capturing the earlier incident. All the other vehicles' in-dash camera footage is intact except for this one. It also captured all of the communication between the incident commander and the rest of the responders that night. So far, OPD has refused to provide this video, and even more insulting, they've refused to say what happened to it, which turns their potentially accidental cover-up into a willful one.
I can tell you that everything I know about East Stoneman
He's a really nice guy and really willing to help any way he can, and just a great guy.
At some point in my investigation, it occurred to me that Heath Stoneman has been living a far harsher version of the movie It's a Wonderful Life. Like George, Stoneman was reeling from a financial setback. Like George, he prayed and briefly lost faith and even contemplated suicide. But instead of a guardian angel interceding at just the right time, police snipers come out and shoot him.
You bring in a sniper to kill a suicidal man? What the hell? That's almost dark comedy. Jesus Christ, Woody Allen should do a movie on this.
Fortunately, when the people who knew Heath found out about what happened almost a year after his conviction, they pulled together $26,000. We took that money and hired one of, if not the, best post-conviction attorneys in the state of Texas, a man named Randy Schaefer. He's had the case now for close to a year, and after all of the typical stonewalling by the government agencies involved, we're at an inflection point. Let me tell you what Mr. Schaefer has been able to determine about the case. First, the lead investigator admitted that he was unaware of the video, which I have claimed was destroyed. Somehow, the Odessa Police Department was able to keep this video away from state investigators charged with determining the validity of the Stoneman shooting. Second, Schaefer confirmed that Stoneman's original defense counsel was also unaware of this missing video. But what about the video itself? Well, thanks to a little thing called discovery, we now have proof that the video I alleged was destroyed was in fact destroyed. Here is a screenshot showing that the video was deleted not just from the Coban video system, but also from the computer disk upon which the data was stored, and astonishingly, from the tape backup system as well.
The ethical standards of a professional organization are absolutely paramount.
It's basically exposure through the media. Probably the best you could hope for.
Even if this media exposure doesn't occur, Stoneman's request for a new trial is now officially before the court. Our efforts to date have caused the Odessa Police Department to open an internal affairs investigation into the destruction of evidence. If this is done properly, it should lead to a reinvestigation of the original shooting and the complete exoneration of Heath Stoneman.